Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We'll just give it a second or so. The participants which are still joining, I see now that we are stabilizing at 60. And if it's not increasing at the rate that it was increasing, I'll start shortly. And I think it has stabilized. Let me start the meeting. Good morning, everyone, again. Welcome to this webinar on the Minerals Council's program on advancing the just transition. This seminar was organized by the Minerals Council on the basis of the mandate that we've received from our members, the Coal Leadership Forum, that in February last year, the Coal Leadership Forum approved a coal innovation and technology roadmap, which would be based on a combination of doing intensive desktop research, and then an expert intervention interactions with both mining companies and other relevant stakeholders in the coal sector. The roadmap's purpose was to identify a set of technology and innovation areas that, if successfully achieved, would result in a lower exposure to environmental, social, and governance-related risk. But not only that, but it will result in improved productivity and enhanced resilience to the economic and legislative volatility that the coal sector is facing. We have done a number of reviews of different and multiple documents produced by different stakeholders, which we consolidated and synthesized into a coherent scenario framework for ourselves to inform our strategic decision making. We have come to the conclusion that a number of queries were raised regarding this strategy, that we do recognize the multiple views from different factors as opposed to a singular view on the future of coal. We were considering the impact of new investments in coal resources, the reinforcement of the need for clean coal technologies as a strategic driver. We also identified 4 key risks which were important in terms of advancing the future of coal. The first one was that the relative cost of renewable energy continues to fall compared to coal, that Eskom's poor performance actually incentivizes South Africa to explore alternative power options, and that the emissions controls regime continue to tighten, placing additional pressure on coal users and developing a negative narrative around coal. That local and global growth of coal will eventually slow down, which will affect the overall demand for coal. And therefore, in order to offset this risk, the Coal Innovation and Technology Roadmap was approved that would identify research and development, innovation areas that would potentially mitigate against this risk. So as part of that process, we had the first breakfast seminar that we held in Sandton that involved the financial institutions, which each of them espousing their own views in terms of what the options do they have in terms of funding coal-related projects. So we had the PIC, we had Standard Bank, we had other funding institutions in the meeting, which gave their views as to how they're going to either fund or not fund coal-related projects. But since then, there have been developments which in South Africa relates to the emission profile of South Africa that needs to transition to a low carbon economy. And furthermore, the carbon tax came into the picture, and there is a climate change bill in the making. So all in all, we do have a view to advance that in order for a just transition to take place, all the pipeline of projects that need to advance this just transition need to take into account various views. And we have created this platform today, basically from a technology perspective, to see what is there in the market. So it's essentially a festival of ideas where people come with their own views. And from these views, the Minerals Council will then consolidate these views and present its views in future discussions. So in the interest of time, before we go into the project, into the program proper, I just wish to highlight some few rules for engagement for this webinar. The first one is that you are welcome and you are free to ask questions, and you have to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the panel in your view, where you will see the Q&A. That's where you will ask your questions, and we endeavor to answer all the questions. And where we are unable to provide the questions as of now, we will provide an email response to that question, because the organizers of the webinar have got the contact details of all the participants. Secondly, you also have got the option of a chat where you want to express a view or make a comment regarding whether you can hear the sound or the picture or the slides you can see, etc., etc. So you do have that that option. And thirdly, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and if you've got any objections to the recording of this webinar, I think you need to alert us that you have a problem, and then we can deal with that. So let's get to the program proper. And in the opening address, I would like to welcome Mr. July Ndlovu, who is the chairman, the current chairman of the Coal Leadership Forum, and he is the CEO of Anglo-American Coal and chairman of the World Coal Association. So he's really the key champion in the coal value chain. July, over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Lesufi, for the warm introduction and the opportunity to make some opening remarks at our second ever webinar on the core innovation and technology. At the outset, what I would like to do is to acknowledge the Minerals Council team for their stellar leadership, for the advocacy and guidance that you have continued to provide to all the members, I guess, as we progress towards the recovery from the challenging time that we all have gone through posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. The last few months have undoubtedly been some of the most challenging of my entire career. I've been for 30 years in the mining industry and have never experienced anything like this. I know that I'm not alone when I say that. No one could have imagined just how severe the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic would be on almost every aspect of our lives and our economy, not just in South Africa, but across the globe. What is pleasing, though, is that the mining industry stands out in its continued response to the pandemic. We can all be proud of the enormous effort we've made as an industry to safeguard not only the lives of our employees, but their livelihoods. Nowhere is that even more evident than in South Africa, where technology and innovation has become crucial for the recovery of the industry and the country as a whole. As we gather for a co-innovation and just transition discussion, maybe allow me a couple of minutes just to wander around the panorama of the history of why we're here today. We all know that without coal, the industrial revolution of the late 18th and 19th century could have been hard to come by because the steam engine assisted to power the Industrial Revolution. The steam engines were initially used to remove water from the mines and enable shafts to be made deeper, which allowed more minerals, especially coal, to be mined. Before the Industrial Revolution, the most commonly used energy source was wood. It was two features that displaced wood as the most important energy carrier. It was the price and the fact that wood has got a low calorific value compared to coal. After the price of wood skyrocketed, coal became the preferred substitute. And in 1879, Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity. And along with the discovery came new products, such as synthetic abrasives, chlorine, aluminum, stainless steel, tungsten, and many others. These products led to further innovations such as high-speed grinders, chlorinated water, PVC, incandescent lighting as we know it, X-rays. I could carry on. But the effect of these technological innovations was a much longer human lifespan as we know it today. Improvement in welfare, increased productivity, and just the improvement of people coming out of poverty in general. Since then, the relevance of coal in the evolution of the global energy mix has not waned. In fact, coal has become, as I repeatedly say, one of the pillars of human progress and success as we go forward. So, even in our time, coal continues to play that vital role in meeting global energy needs. And it is critical, absolutely critical, to building societies, considering the importance not just of energy, because that's what we tend to talk about, but cement, steel, and concrete production. It is the second most important energy source after oil. Globally, 27% of primary energy needs are met by coal, and roughly 30%, 40% of electricity is generated from coal. In fact, in some countries like ours, South Africa, this number is even higher, could be roughly 80%. So we cannot deny that coal will continue to be an essential part of our society, not just in the near term, but probably in the long term. However, in the same breath, it is a well-known fact that coal use comes with unintended consequences, especially in the form of greenhouse gas emissions, CO2. And at a multilateral level, governments have responded by developing an environmental compact to reduce the use of coal, which is responsible for over 60% of global carbon dioxide emissions, according to some studies. The Paris Agreement is probably the most notable compact, which requires member countries to combat climate change and emissions and to accelerate and intensify those actions needed for a sustainable low carbon future. When I say that, I know it has been interpreted in a lot of places to indicate a future which is zero coal, especially for power generation. I don't subscribe to that. However, having said that, it should be noted that emission reduction beyond the mining industry is probably one of the most effective and yet underexplored avenues. I guess when you think about it, whilst we mine the coal, emissions happen further down the value chain. And at least this value chain works together innovatively, applying technologies, the latest thinking, we probably will not achieve the aspirations of the Paris Accord as a compact. What we have just gone through with the pandemic has permanently changed the world as we know it. Recently, the IEA noted that across all regions of the world, energy demand during the lockdown dropped to standard levels. They actually further noted that there's been a major shift towards the use of renewable energy following lockdown measures. In fact, we saw this if you watch some of the press reports and look at pictures of cities like Delhi or Beijing, how they looked pre and post COVID, you can actually understand the changes that have happened. There are probably 3 reasons for this trend, and this trend could become the norm. Firstly is that renewables have low operating costs, and as Mr. Lesufi rightly observed at the beginning, the cost continues to drop. Secondly, government policy and public sentiments are in favor of renewable energy technologies. In fact, coal has become one of those commodities everyone would love to hate, whilst we use it today, and probably will continue to be required in the future. And lastly, across many jurisdictions, priorities given for access to the grid when energy demand is low, that access and priority is given to renewable energy. It is known, however, that renewable energy, as we have got it today, does not provide baseload power, simply because battery technology is still very expensive and significant developments still need to happen. So for countries that want to pursue an industrialization strategy, and we are no exception, what would that mean? That the aspirations will have to stop while battery technology is under development? Or they would have to invest in significantly more expensive energy? I think what COVID has done, on the other hand, is exacerbated the unemployment problem across the globe. And without proper baseload power, the prospects of bringing all these people back into sustainable employment look bleak in my view. So what that does for us is that it makes it imperative to develop clean coal technologies to alleviate an imminent social and economic catastrophe that will be brought about as a result of this pandemic. And at the same time, other new core industries should be developed to assist in the alleviation of the social and economic catastrophe. The COVID-19 pandemic has also required that we innovate just beyond technology, but also through how we respond to the vulnerabilities of our host communities. Through the Anglo-American We Care program launched at the beginning of the lockdown, we were able to work closely with government to provide wide-ranging support to our communities through food parcels, water supply, contribution of PPE to communities, to clinics and schools, COVID awareness, and probably help fight one of the pandemics bedeviling South Africa, which is violence against women and children. So let me come back home. In South Africa, coal remains a vital pillar of both our mining industry and the economy. In 2019, our coal sales totaled around 140 billion from a total sales volume of just about 260 million tons. We derive 70% of our energy requirements, both electricity and liquid fuels, from coal. We employ over 95,000 employees in the coal industry. That's about 20% of the mining industry. If you include the related industries, both upstream and downstream, The coal value chain in South Africa is estimated to employ roughly 230,000 people. So South Africa, being a signatory of the Paris Agreement, and the fact that coal use will continue, has left a policy gap between what the country aspires to achieve in relation to a low carbon future and the reality that coal is very much part of our social and national existence. So for me, the question becomes, what will bridge the gap? How will this gap be bridged? For me, the answer lies in technology and innovation, as well as the regulations and policies which will allow the continued use of coal. So let me just give you a few suggestions. Because there is a great demand for that cleaner coal technologies, because there is cheap and plentiful coal, and it also remains the single largest source to generate electricity worldwide. Cleaner coal technologies actually have the potential to revolutionize the coal value chain and upgrade billions to high-rank coal around the world. Economically viable technologies are the only solution to helping developing nations to continue to use coal efficiently, but in an environmental and sustainable manner. And this is a word that has probably become a cliche, clean or cleaner coal technologies. And what do I mean by that? These are a collection of technologies which are being developed or have been developed actually in some instances in an attempt to lessen the environmental impact of coal energy generation and to mitigate the emissions associated with that. These technologies are designed to enhance both the efficiency and the environmental acceptability of coal extraction, preparation, and its use. The modern coal technologies include things like high efficiency, low emission technologies, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And these technologies are commercially available today, and they can contribute to mitigate and reduce these emissions. Now, if we are to continue on the path we are on, which is attempting to use coal without adding to atmospheric carbon dioxide, this becomes quite a major technological challenge. And the greatest challenge is actually around bringing down the cost of these technologies sufficiently for clean or cleaner coal technologies to compete against alternatives such as nuclear power, hydro. While some money has been spent, I would want to argue that not enough has been done. The world spent roughly $1 billion on these cleaner coal technologies between 2009 and 2013. But that amount has fallen down very sharply, especially at a time when we need these technological breakthroughs even more. So fundamentally, when it comes to clean coal technologies, I would say to you, the technology works, but the economics don't. By some measurements and estimates, power plants with CCUS cost roughly 70% more than regular coal plants. And the infrastructure required to transport, to store, and sometimes finding uses for this CO2 has become a challenge. But if we choose to be innovative and creative, this CO2 can be the birth of new industries. And I think this is where government should come in to create an enabling environment for the development of these clean coal or cleaner technologies, as I call them. And secondly, by virtue of coal being in our lives for decades to come, we can't wish it away. And if we can't wish it away, I would argue that therefore government should incentivize R&D directed towards the development of the technologies required to mitigate the effects of these emissions. Of course, among other proposals, South Africa should take steps to ensure that we, as a country that is so dependent on our coal, also steps up to the plate in terms of innovation around clean coal technologies. And for me, the reasons are both ethical and economical. Ethical in the sense that we rely on coal, and our communities are impacted by the pollutions that results from coal use. And economical because the contribution that coal makes to our economy cannot be underestimated. New technologies are always emerging, which would enable coal mining companies to transition into alternate energy supplies as mining ceases. And of course, we as an industry has been working and piloting a concept which we call the green engine. And the green engine is something that we as Coal South Africa have been leading. We actually call it a lighthouse project, and it has the potential to address significantly many of the SDGs and realize a responsible transition by integrating environmental and social requirements during the closure process of coal mines through collaboration within the regional context of where our mines are. When we conceptualized this idea, we wanted to achieve sustainable mine closure by creating symbiotic circular economies, whereby mine rehabilitation and water management create opportunities for community development, empowerment of those communities, and projects that creates alternative livelihoods. I can give you examples like the utilization of waste resources in the form of tires, coal fines, production of biomass, biofiber, solar PV on rehabilitated land, all form part of the opportunities for alternate low carbon energy production and the development of alternative livelihoods post-closure. So repurposing of existing mine infrastructure at closure into education training facilities for the reskilling and upskilling of community members and mine employees will ensure skills that are relevant and in alignment with the opportunities that we can develop through the social and sustainable transformation process we call the green engine. So for me, coal is a bright future in South Africa. And as the country, at current consumption levels, we have 200 years of coal left in the ground. Renewable energy and coal can live contemporaneously without the need to create competition between the energy resources. In fact, they can complement each other. Coal can also be co-fired with biomass and waste materials. Renewables such as solar can support the thermal aspects for steam raising in coal-fired power stations. For this to happen, there is need to collaborate between the coal industry, government, academia, and other stakeholders. I hope that the deliberations that will take place here today will not just serve as an information and education platform, but the insights of the experts in attendance will end up informing policy formulation for a greener, sustainable future for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, July. Again, you've got the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Please, if you've got questions, you can start scribbling those questions down. We've got a team that is collating those questions for answers later on. Without any waste of time, I'll go to our next speaker. The next speaker is Mr. Davis Cook, who is the CEO of REES. Davis is a regular feature in the Minerals Council, and he has been instrumental in terms of consolidating the various views of different stakeholders into a coherent policy statement that the Minerals Council can advance. Davis is going to give us a talk on closing the gap between RSA's climate change commitments and emission profile. It's going to consider some potential technology pathways. Davis, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lesufi. Let me just share my screen. I trust that everyone will be able to see this. There are some slides and some thoughts that I'd like to reflect on as I talk through this. Also, Mr. Mlowi, thank you for that. There were a number of items that you'd mentioned that actually speak a lot to what we've done here. So one of the things that we've been really interested in trying to understand is what is the gap between our aspirations as a country in regards to climate change and meeting climate change targets, not just from a policy perspective, but because this represents an important kind of environmental future, but also those commitments that we've made and our intent in terms of our energy mix. And so understanding what that gap looks like is important from a measurement and a management point of view in order to close it. So what I want to start with is this idea that there is no single problem that can be solved. All of the problems that we are dealing with at the moment are very much interconnected. You know, we've seen certainly through the last sort of 6 or 9 months, this very close interaction between healthcare and the economy, but that speaks to livelihoods, it speaks to education. And so our ability to solve one problem is difficult. And instead, when we start trying to create systemic changes, we actually achieve a lot more in that process. Now, systemic changes are more difficult, but that's where the real innovation comes through. So if you think of something like, you know, mobile phones is the most sort of recent example, or smartphones, which are now only 12 years old, they didn't just change one particular issue around how we made phone calls. They really fundamentally shifted the way that we interact with each other, with companies, the way that we do commerce, the way that we collect data. There are so many changes that happen throughout so many different parts of our society that they represent real fundamental shifts. And that's what I talk about when we speak about these interconnected problems. Now, one of the challenges that we face when it comes to this question of energy is a kind of triad of problems. And, you know, as July was saying, you know, we need to sort of balance 3 things. One is there is growth, right? How do we create value for people in South Africa and beyond, right? And economic growth is very much driven by access to power and access to affordable power. So this is something that we all know. Economic growth, in turn, enables the achievement of better livelihoods. And it's no surprise, for example, that over the last 25 years, as sort of the well-being and livelihoods of South Africans has increased, that's gone hand in hand with increased access to power, right? It powers education, it powers, you know, business, it powers healthcare. And I think one of the things that is sometimes forgotten is that as we move into a kind of fourth industrial revolution, which is a digital technology-driven world, that technology is all based on access to electricity. So the only way that we can continue to achieve this improvement in our well-being and sort of have meaningful positive impact on people is by enabling access to power. At the same time, we need to balance this with this question of sustainability and ensuring that there is a sustainable, healthy environmental context for the future. And so we have a choice really around where in this triangle we can position ourselves. And I think that as we learn more and as we've uncovered more around how the world works, there's definitely been a shift towards a more inclusive, transparently calculated kind of sustainability question. But to move towards either one or any of these vertices is going to be ultimately catastrophic if we do it exclusive of the others. And so we need to find a way to balance these three elements between growth, livelihoods, and sustainability. So I want to start by talking about the growth side of things. Now, coal in South Africa is not going to go away for the foreseeable future. So this, for example, provides just a high-level view on the kind of energy mix for South Africa over the next 20 years, and coal will remain a critical component. Now, we know that this is true, even though Eskom, for example, is expecting to decommission about 10,500 megawatts of power over the next 10 years to 2030. There is still the creation of about another 7,500 megawatts of new build or extension. So the actual kind of net drop in coal generation is quite small, certainly to 2030. And even to 2040, when we see that, other types of kind of energy is going to come from solar and hydro and an increase in oil, as we see kind of an increase in living standards and mobility, coal remains a fundamental driver for the South African energy landscape. That is not an aspiration, that is a committed intent. This is something that we can pretty much bank on happening. And I think that this guaranteed view of the future is important when we consider the other aspect, which is what do we aspire to? And so from that perspective, we also looked at where are South Africa's emissions commitments going to take us in future. And so this comes from a broader group called Climate Action Tracker, which looks at how our most recent policy and government plans kind of will impact on our emissions programs. So it takes into account, for example, the energy mix that we saw on the previous slide. Now, at best, even with the kind of the reduction that we've seen in demand over the last year with COVID-19, our best case pre-COVID scenario had us in the middle of the insufficient impact in terms of climate emissions. And together with the COVID-19 impacts, which has obviously dropped economic growth, and that leads to a reduction in coal demand, at best, we are at the real top end of the 2 degrees Celsius compatible range, and at the lower end of the 3 degrees Celsius sort of insufficient range. And that assumes that everything goes right. It assumes that, if we do every single thing possible that we can within our policy environment, within our targets, we raise the appropriate investment funds, we are pretty much going to be at an insufficient level in regards to our carbon emissions as a country. Now, that still doesn't even meet our actual Paris Agreement, which is aiming for what you see here is the green bar, which is this 1.5 degrees Celsius Paris Agreement compatible target. If if, given the policy commitments that we've made as a country, we are to achieve those, we're missing about 80 megatons of CO2 equivalents per year. That is just not anywhere in the policy work. It's not anywhere in the plans produced by government. It's simply an acknowledgement that we are not going to achieve our agreement. So there is a very real difference between our aspiration, which is this Paris Agreement that we've committed to and ratified as a country, and the reality of what we're going to achieve as a region. Now, this is obviously going to be problematic, and it has different implications for industry, for society, but does speak to a very difficult position that the country is in now around how do we meet these different objectives. And I think there's a very real question to ask, which is, are these competing objectives? So I think one of the first questions to ask is like, well, what are the kinds of things that government are doing? And like, what can be done? So what is the initial effort from the government side? And so there is quite a lot that's being sort of put forward. The most recent low emission development strategy, which was produced by the Department of Environment and Energy and sort of issued for consultation at the beginning part of this year, really proposed a number of different ideas. And there is a broader wish list, and certainly seeing the economic recovery plan that was recently released by the presidency, there are a number of aspirational wishes about what we want to achieve, right? There is new hydro capacity of 2,500 megawatts. There's, just shy of 7,000 megawatts of PV, 16,000 of wind. There's a range of different energy efficiency programs, many of which have to do with ensuring that the built environment, particularly kind of homes and offices, are much more energy efficient. Mobility programs and the shift towards gas as a fuel source. And then, as mentioned, a range of tax incentives and punitive tax policies, such as the recently imposed carbon tax. But in as much as there is a wish list for changing this, the reality is that the government has simply not demonstrated a track record of following through on many of these issues. Our history of approving renewable energy is quite low, and given the economic and financial challenges that the country has now and will have over the next couple of years, I think there is a very real question around access to capital, investment capital. So we have to ask ourselves and be realistic in asking, even if we were to achieve everything we wanted to, we're not going to meet our targets. And how likely is it that we will actually achieve what we have committed to as a country? And on the balance of our performance over the last couple of decades, I think the likelihood is that we will fall short at a public sector level of achieving this. And this is not, meant or intended as a sort of criticism of what the public sector is doing. I think that there are very complex competing priorities between livelihoods, between access to capital, between investment and financial decisions. There is no easy answer to this. So I think that in conclusion here, we're probably not going to sort of meet these targets. And that means that this 80 megaton gap is going to be even larger. And that kind of really brings me then to the next question, which is, what does the rest of the industry do? And is there a choice that the industry can make to close this gap? And so as had been mentioned by Mr. Lesufi earlier, Minerals Council had done significant work over the last 2 years to identify a range of projects that could meaningfully impact on the not just climate, but other environmental sustainability of the coal industry, recognizing that there are, well over several decades worth of significant coal industry activities, what are the things that we can do to begin to close this gap? And this is done both from a commercial as well as from a more kind of moral or ethical imperative. Commercially, we know that there are carbon taxes coming in, but in addition to that, we know that the use of newer technologies inevitably drives down the cost of operation. So, short-term investments into new technology and in innovation, yes, there is sort of risk associated with that, but in addition to that, there are long-term benefits that come through. And so part of the work that had been done by Minerals Council was to map out, as you can see, a large number of projects, and the details of all of these can be shared. I've just provided an indication of what some of these programs are. And they're sort of defined across programs that can be implemented, really within, a 1 to 3 year period. So well in time for any kind of 2030 aspirational target. And then others that are, longer to actually implement, but will also achieve some high value. And so what are some of these kinds of technologies? So we looked across the entire value chain of the coal sector, all the way from exploration, all the way through to rehabilitation and usage. Some of them have already been discussed. Mr. Ndlovu spoke about carbon capture and storage. He spoke around high efficiency, low emission technologies. But there are a range of other elements. So whether this is things like in situ gasification or oxy-fuel combustion programs, these are things that have been demonstrated to be viable technologies. They're not necessarily commercially viable just yet, and this was an important point. But that's the point of innovation, which is taking ideas at which the technology risk has been reduced to almost nothing, and ensuring that there is a commercially viable implementation program that sits on top of it. Programs like and research such as optical sorting, particularly with the development of new artificial intelligence and machine learning programs, this kind of work can have significant increases in your throughput rates. There are a range of other digital technologies that have been built, and there are a couple of sort of pathfinding minds in South Africa, even in the coal industry, looking at very, very digital programs and digitized 4IR working environments. So again, the technology exists. It's a question of building the right commercial pathway for this to happen. The last element, and this kind of begins to speak quite a lot to part of the strategy from a government point of view around economic recovery, is how do we drive entrepreneurial activity and technology accelerators and innovation programs related to coal. So there is an active coal research and development program led through the Coal Tech Research Alliance. But, while that focuses on some very hard technical engineering related to coal, there are so many other areas that we can consider, whether it is, renewed social engagement models. Minerals Council is looking at some of this, but how do we innovate around our community engagement process? How do we innovate around access to data? How do we innovate around rehabilitation programs? So there is like an incredibly wide range of programs. What is missing at the moment, however, is a consolidated value chain wide agreement on how to address this, and also what is the kind of outcome or target that the industry can chase that would drive a common vision, common alignment. So I kind of want to come back then in summary just to this idea of where in the triangle do we want to sit. Certainly the idea that we pursue growth at all costs and at the cost of livelihoods and an environmentally sustainable world is not something that we can pursue. At the same time, to simply abandon the the 53 billion tons of coal that are sitting in South Africa in pursuit of a 100% green energy mix doesn't make sense, particularly when there are technologies available that would enable us to access that coal at a much more efficient and cleaner mechanism. And this really then speaks to the point that a diversified energy mix in which we are constantly investing into newer, more efficient ways of managing our emissions is really going to be an optimal way of balancing between livelihoods, growth, and sustainability. So just in conclusion, I think that there are some large gaps between what we aspire to and what we intend to do. At least 80 megatons of CO2 emissions per year. There are a number of technologies that have been identified that can help close this gap, that can help address not just CO2, but things like water, livelihoods, and a range of other areas. And there is a real opportunity for the industry to proactively contribute towards closing these gaps in a way that makes commercial sense and that really drives sustainability of the industry and not just the planet. So I'll leave it there for any questions and comments, but really do encourage that we think carefully around where in this triangle we want to play, and there is a way for us to balance all of it. Thank you, and I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Davis. Just to remind colleagues, you've got the Q&A button there. Don't forget to use it so that if you've got any questions, the panelists can then respond to those questions. Our next speaker is Vinesh Rajkumar. He's from Vinesh Rajkumar Consulting, and his presentation will be on imparting knowledge on clean coal technologies and how they can be applied in the coal value chain. Vinesh, over to you. Davis, can you unshare so that Vinesh can share the screen?
Nix, I am not sharing.
Okay, can you see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay, can I continue?
Continue, sir.
Okay, good morning to one and all. The objective of this presentation is to basically, sorry, there's something that has come up. Yeah, the objective of this presentation is basically to facilitate a better understanding of technology and its application to enable power plants to run more cleanly, thereby emitting far less pollution. This presentation will follow the following format. The importance of coal. You've heard this from the previous two speakers as well, but please bear with me. What constitutes greenhouse emissions and its impacts? A brief overview of clean coal technologies, and lastly, how these technologies can be applied. As an independent, I would like to state upfront that I'm not a representative of any technology provider, nor am I punting any specific technology. Coal is an indigenous resource of South Africa. We heard this before, and a very significant contributor towards the economy. Despite its importance, the role of coal is being disrupted by policy and regulatory changes such as policy shifts to reduce the contribution of coal in South Africa in the energy mix, and climate change commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Coal is uniquely capable of providing the most stable electricity with a scale and cost profile that is unmatched compared with any other power generation. Coal is the lowest priced energy carrier per kilojoule energy compared to other fuels. Coal is a very complex chemical lattice of carbon, hydrogen, and various elements such as sulfur, nitrogen, mercury, and other trace elements. When combusted, these elements are converted to chemical forms that create pollutants that are harmful to the environment if not addressed. Extensive research suggests that coal is still crucial for the world and cannot disappear from the energy mix despite being portrayed as a polluting energy source. Energy and mining companies have been under increasing pressure to clean up their emissions. The survival of coal industry is dependent on promoting the idea of clean coal technology as an energy generation option. So what is clean coal technology? Clean coal technology is an umbrella term encompassing a wide array of new generation and advanced technologies designed to enhance both the efficiency and the environmental acceptability of coal in the mining, extraction, preparation, and use. The emissions of concern in the coal value chain are liquid emissions, solid emission, such as ash, waste from coal processing, and gaseous emissions into the atmosphere. Hence, environmental acceptability implies all commissions from the coal value chain that contribute to global climate impacts and health impacts. Due to time constraints, my presentation will concentrate basically on technologies to address gaseous emissions only. Global warming is not caused by CO2 alone. Rather, global warming is a result of all the greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas emissions is a generic name given for any gas in the atmosphere which absorbs and re-emits heat. The main greenhouse gas emissions of concern, oh, sorry, I think I've skipped, I've gone too far, okay. The main greenhouse gas emissions of concern are water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, ozone, and fluorinated gases. Note that SO2 is not included in the GHG, but its impact is more health related. Reading emissions data can be very confusing. Different terms such as greenhouse gases, CO2, CO2 equivalent, and carbon get used in reporting and at times interchangeably. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of the combustion of fossil fuels and living cellular respiration. Carbon dioxide equivalent is a measure used to compare the emissions from various greenhouse gas based upon the global warming potential reduced to a common base, which is carbon dioxide. For any of the defined greenhouse gas, carbon equivalent signifies the amount of carbon dioxide which would have the equivalent global warming impact. Carbon is a chemical element which is present in many gases and compounds. CO2 is not equal to CO2 equivalent and is not equal to carbon. How are CO2 equivalent values calculated? The basis generally is a 100-year global warming potential as defined in the IPCC assessment report. If you look at carbon dioxide is the base, which is 1. Methane, based on a 100-year global warming potential, is 25. The nitrous oxide is around 260 to 300. The fluorinated gases is the worst, and it can be as high as 22,000. Now, if you look at the methane, its average lifetime in the atmosphere is 12.4 years. which means that CO2, the methane will remain in the atmosphere for up to 12.4 years. Hence, its short-term impact on the environment is very great. If you look at the 20-year global warming potential of methane, it is 85. This implies that 1 ton of methane emitted is equivalent to 85 tons of CO2 in the short term. Natural gas is widely considered as a viable replacement for coal, as the emission from gas combustion is lower than the emissions from coal at the point of combustion. The drawback with this evaluation is emissions are compared at point of combustion and only CO2 emissions are taken into consideration. Emissions from smokestacks do not tell the full story. Concentrating only at the point of use emissions will not effectively address climate change, as GHG emissions take place at the different stages in the coal value chain, which cumulatively contribute to global climate impact. Each fossil fuel has a different life cycle, and each fossil fuel contributes greenhouse gases at different stages of its life cycle. This slide shows the coal value chain. The life stages can be divided into mining, coal processing, transport, and the end consumer. If you look at the types of emissions that occur in different stages of the value chain, in the mining stage, you've got methane and CO2 emissions. In the coal processing, methane and carbon dioxide emissions. Transport, CO2 emissions. At the consumer point, CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions. Comparing coal to LNG value chain, the LNG value chain is far more complex, with emissions occurring in different stages of its life cycle. In the exploration and pre-production stage, you get methane and carbon dioxide. In the extraction and processing, methane and carbon dioxide. In the liquefaction process, methane and carbon dioxide. Storage, transport, and regas, methane and carbon dioxide. Pipeline network, if applicable, methane. End user, methane, CO2, and GHG. If you look at the methane emissions are basically due to venting and it leaks, or ventings and leaks. The uncertainty over the level of methane emitted to the atmosphere raises questions about the extent of climate benefit this gas can bring. Recent studies show that methane losses to the atmosphere is around 2.3% of total production, significantly higher than the Environmental Protection Agency's estimate of 1.4%. If we just look at these pie charts, demonstrates a carbon equivalent impact of methane if we use a 20-year greenhouse gas global warming potential versus the normal 100-year greenhouse gas potential. The value changes from 17% contribution to 42%. As the demand for LNG increases and coal declines, the impact of methane will surpass coal. We will now look at some technologies that can be used to improve the image of coal. Climate mitigation interventions pose unique challenges due to the major factors influencing the selection of energy sources, which are energy availability, economics, affordability, and lastly, environmental considerations. Again, to reiterate, GHGs are not emitted only at the point of use. The lack of understanding of what contributes to GHG emissions and the lack of awareness of the technologies available for addressing emissions in the coal value chain. CCTs are perceived to be costly and energy intensive, and hence advocates of renewables believe that fossil fuels should be removed from the energy mix. Coal is competing against gas and renewables for survival, and therefore will require a different way of thinking to enhance its productivity and climate change concerns simultaneously. To contribute to climate change, the CCT processes for coal life cycle stages. Let us look at the first stage of coal mining. Coals are highly heterogeneous and varies widely in quality from mine to mine and even from seam to seam. Coal is normally associated with ash-forming minerals, including sand, rock, and chemical materials, for example, organic sulfur, nitrogen, and some mineral salts. Some mineral salts are intermixed to the coal seam or bound organically to the coal, and some are introduced by the mining process. The coal cleaner technologies that can be employed in the mining process are operational efficiencies through enhanced mining methods, optimal reserve recovery using advanced extraction methods, methane gas capture, underground coal gasification. Underground coal gasification is an industrial process which converts coal into a product gas. UCG is an in situ gasification process carried out in non-mineable coal seams using injection of oxidants and steam. The predominant gas produced are methane, hydrogen, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide. The cleaner coal technologies in the coal preparation stages could be coal cleaning or coal washing and beneficiation, ultra clean coal, dry waterless cleaning technologies, coal dehydration technologies. Coal cleaning and washing at a mine or at the power plant removes ash, rock, and moisture from coal to the extent possible. It reduces emissions of ash and gas emissions such as SOx, NOx, and other byproducts of combustion when the coal is burned. Ultra clean coal technologies reduces sulfur to a very low level. Also, consistent quality will facilitate stable plant operation and better operating efficiencies. If you look at quickly how a wet process looks like, this system uses physical cleaning, varies amongst coal cleaning plants, but broadly involves the following stages: initial preparation, fine coal processing, and coarse coal processing, and final preparation. Dry cleaning methods such as gravity separators, air table, air jigs can also be used when wet washing is not suitable or when washing plants are considered not economically feasible. Coal Cleaning Inc. is developing the first economically viable and scalable coal dehydration technology that creates stable dust-free coal. This technology puts low coal quality through a mild gasification process, removing moisture. Low moisture contents improve combustion efficiency. Clean coal technologies are the focus on advanced generation and clean coal technologies to advance efficiencies. Improve efficiency increases the power output for a given unit of coal resource. More efficient coal combustion technologies reduce emissions of CO2 and pollutants such as NOx, SOx, and particulates. Cleaner coal technologies used during combustion include HELE technologies, fluidized bed combustion, integrated gasification combined cycle, pulverized coal, supercritical and ultra supercritical boilers, oxy-fuel combustion, chemical looping combustion, carbonate looping combustion, NOx control processes, advanced control systems, supercritical CO2-based power generation. Circulating fluidized bed combustion power generation is considered to be one of the most suitable clean coal technology solution, as it is most efficient method to address escalating environmental constraints it has low NOx capability and furnace sorbent injection for CO2 removal. And also CFB technology tolerates a wide fuel flexibility and quality variation in the fuel source. Steam conditions have a large impact on the thermodynamic cycle of coal-fired power plants. Extensive research and
we seem to have run into a technical problem. Kirsten, is it possible to sort us out, or Vinesh is back?
Yeah, he seemed to have dropped off. Maybe he had an internet connection issue, but I see he's back, so he'll just need to.
Yeah, you can continue, Vinesh. You can just reshare your screen and continue.
boiler efficiency is improved from an average of 33% for subcritical technology to 41% for supercritical and 45% for ultra supercritical and up to 50% for advanced ultra supercritical technology. With the advancement in technology, there is a huge potential for lower emissions through improved efficiencies.
So, Vinesh, your slides are not showing.
Oh. No, don't seem to be getting back on your screen. Let me try again.
Thanks. Go the slides and go into presentation mode.
Okay, this graph basically just shows you how the improving technology can actually help in reducing the amount of CO2 emitted. This is a schematic diagram of an IGCC plant. The IGCC plant consists the four main operating units for IGCC plant is a gasifier, wet gas cleanup, the combined cycle power plant, and the air separation unit. In comparison to combustion-based technologies, IGCC offers advantages such as increased efficiency from the combined cycle, can be designed to use a wide range of feedstocks, improved environmental performance, lower cost of cleanup technologies, more compatible. The cleanup technologies is more compatible with carbon capture and sequestration technologies. And also it has saleable products such as slag, sulfur, gypsum, and clean CO2, which becomes a saleable product. This slide shows you some of the unit operations using the IGCC technology for carbon capture. The carbon capture takes place in the gas cleanup train for the syngas, which is then routed to the gas turbine in the power generation island. This table gives you a quick overview of the CO2 emissions for the different power generation technologies. With improving efficiencies due to higher steam conditions come reduced emissions. If you look at for subcritical operation at roughly 36% efficiency, your carbon emissions are roughly 880 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, going up to an IGCC with 45 to 50% efficiency and CO2 emissions as low as 670 grams per kilowatt hour. NOx reduction technologies that can be used. These are primary. There are two sort of types of controls. primary abatement technologies that reduce NOx produced in the primary combustion state. These reduction technologies are based on chemistry of NOx formation and focus on minimizing peak combustion temperatures and the residence time at peak temperatures. Low NOx burners allow coal-fired boilers to reduce NOx emissions by 40%. With the addition of reburning techniques, NOx can be reduced by 70%. Some of the technologies that are employed for NOx include low excess air combustion, low NOx burners, staged combustion, flue gas recirculation, and NOx reburning. We look at some of the advanced technologies that are sort of commercial, are available to reduce CO2 emissions. Oxy-combustion uses pure oxygen in the boiler to significantly increase the concentration of CO2 in the exhaust gas stream, which enables easier CO2 capture. NOx formation is reduced to a minimum because no air is used, hence no nitrogen impacts from the air. Only NOx formation is from the nitrogen compound associated with the coal. Chemical looping combustion is a technological process typically employing a dual fluidized bed system. In the chemical looping combustion, a metal oxide is employed as a bed material, providing the oxygen for combustion in the fuel reactor, and the spent bed material is routed to the oxidizer, where it is regenerated and sent back to the fuel reactor. In the carbonate looping process, the CO2 is absorbed and captured by lime from the flue gas entering the carbonator. CO2 depleted flue gas leaves the reactor. The converted limestone is transferred to a second reactor. In this reactor, calcium carbonate is calcined and CO2 is released. A number of technologies has been developed to control particulate and gaseous emissions from coal-fired plants. They include ESPs, fabric filters or baghouses, flue gas desulfurization systems, NOx control systems. Sorbent injection technology using activated carbon, petroleum coke, zeolites, fly ash, chemically treated carbons are used to remove mercury. Sorbents are generally injected upstream of either an ESP or a fabric filter baghouse. Clinical technologies for flue gas treatment includes particulate emissions control technologies, flue gas desulfurization, NOx reduction using SNCR or SCR, mercury removal, and multi-pollutant gas treatments with activated carbon. A number of technologies have been developed to control particulate emissions. The dry ESP uses electrodes to place an electric charge on the particles which are captured on an oppositely charged plate. The particles are then shaken from the plate and collected. A wet ESP is installed after a wet scrubber and uses multiple high voltage fields to attract the particles to an electrode, which are then washed with water. The two technologies commercially available to convert NOx to molecular nitrogen or nitrate. SCR, the selective catalytic reduction, is the injection of ammonia into the flue gas stream in the presence of a catalyst to reduce NOx to nitrogen and water. SNCR is the injection of ammonia or urea into the gas stream without the use of a catalyst. These technologies can be used separately or in combination. Common techniques for SO2 controls includes wet FGD, dry sorbent injection, and semi-dry systems. Wet flue gas desulfurization is a predominant technology worldwide because of its high efficiency and compatibility with various types of coal. Wet FGD reduces the output of SO2 in the atmosphere by up to 97%. However, the reductions depends on the level of sulfur in the coal and the extent of reduction. In the process, a limestone and water mixture is injected into the airstream where the SO2 reacts to form gypsum. Wherever limestone is used, there will be additional CO2 emissions from the carbonate. Dry sorbent injection systems pneumatically inject powdered sorbent into the furnace, the economizer or downstream air duct. The dry waste product is removed removed by the particulate control devices. Key elements that impact SO2 removal rates are sorbent reactivity, sorbent to sulfur ratio, flue gas temperature at the sorbent injection point, and degree of mixing between the sorbent and flue gas. The sulfur removal efficiency ranges between 30 and 80%. Dry scrubbing systems have significantly lower capital and operating costs because they are simpler, demand less water, and waste disposal is less complex. Semi-dry systems or spray dryers inject an aqueous sorbent slurry or slaked lime reagent into flue gas where it dries as it reacts. Products and are dry particles which exit with the flue gas and are collected at the particulate control devices. The aqueous slurry is similar to a wet FGD system. However, the slurry has a higher sorbent concentration. Each of the different techniques has distinctive capabilities for emissions control. More advanced post-combustion sulfur removal solutions that can be employed are Klaus processes to produce elemental sulfur and SNOX process to produce sulfuric acid. More recent developments employ simultaneous multi-pollutant control. One such technology uses activated carbon for the concurrent removal of SOx, NOx, CO2, H2S, heavy metals, dioxins, and furans. Another technology is the electrocatalytic oxidation technology, which consists of a three-stage process. First, the flue gas is led through a gas reactor, which oxidizes the pollutants to higher oxides. Then the gas goes through a wet electrostatic precipitator system for collecting products of the oxidation process and other fine particles. Finally, the effluent is treated to recover valuable byproducts, for example, sulfuric acid and nitric acid. The need to tackle rising CO2 emissions to address climate change means that CCT, or clean coal technologies, now extends to include carbon capture utilization and storage, combined heat and power processes, and hybrid solutions. Some of the techniques are carbon capture and storage, carbon capture and utilization, combined heat and power processes, energy capture from waste heat sources using technologies such as ORC and chilling, and hybrid solutions. These can be complex solutions combining several technologies to achieve environmental goals. Coal can also be used in collaboration with renewable energy, which ensure the reduction of CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions. Solar power can support the thermal aspects for steam raising in the coal-fired power station. Coals can also be co-fired with biomass and a range of waste materials. The development and deployment of CCS technology has significant potential to reduce CO2 emissions in energy systems. CCS is a combination of different technologies of capturing waste CO2, usually from large point sources, transporting it to a storage site, and injecting the captured CO2 in a compressed form into a suitable deep geological strata where the CO2 can be safely stored over an extended period. CCS is also being considered as part of South Africa's energy mix and climate change future. However, some realities for CCS implementation in South Africa. The general geology of South Africa is not suitable for onshore CO2 storage. The CCS value chains will be very complex and has no economic contribution. That is, capture and storage will be a cost burden. South Africa has little opportunity to ultimately store the quantities of CO2 currently being produced. Several different technologies can be used to capture CO2. They fall into two categories: post-combustion CO2 and pre-combustion CO2. Technologies like oxy-fuel combustion, chemical looping combustion, carbonate looping combustion will facilitate easier CO2 capture. Energy efficiency and renewables are often positioned as the only solutions needed to meet climate goals in the energy system, but they are not enough. However, without carbon capture and utilization, coal power plants cannot achieve the deep reductions that is required to avoid substantial contribution to global warming. Carbon is an input chemical and basic components for numerous processes and economic activities, which is mainly derived from fossil fuel or fossil-based raw materials. Globally, over 90% of organic chemicals are derived from fossil-based carbon, which contributes roughly 7% of the global demand for crude oil. The carbon capture and CCU paradigm advances the view that CO2 is a valuable source of carbon. Some carbon utilization pathways. The utilization pathways can be differentiated into two main groups: the conversion route and the non-conversion route. In the non-conversion route, captured carbon can be used directly in processes such as enhanced oil recovery, beverage carbonation, food processing, welding, or as cleaning agent or as a solvent. In the utilization pathway, they can be differentiated into two different main groups, and they can be, in the conversion route, the carbon from the CO2 is reacted with other reagents to form fine chemicals, or conversion of the hydrogen to form hydrocarbon or simple alcohols such as methanol, or further converted into fuels. The fuel pathway has a potential to provide the most meaningful impact on carbon emissions with the production of methane, methanol, and DME. End-of-pipeline pollution abatement technologies integrated with CCU technologies has a potential to achieve climate change mitigation and kickstart an energy revolution. I am at present undertaking a study into practical pathways to utilize recycled carbon from the primary processes of fossil fuel conversion and industrial processes, focusing on the fuel pathway. The biggest challenge is not to shift the environmental burden from one life stage to the another. Based on these considerations, two different scenarios, one for ultra supercritical power plant and one for IGCC plant, demonstrate the integration opportunities for CCC, for clean core technologies. The block diagram is part of a solution for CO2 utilization in the fuel pathway. Integrating CCT and energy and efficiency technologies is an important consideration. Some of the technologies considered are recovery of low-grade or waste heat, and the integration of ORC and absorption chilling technology, carbon capture from the gasifier and turbine, oxy-combustion for the gas turbine. Water recovery is also possible from the gas turbine power island, as syngas is used as the fuel. Different power generating concepts have different energy improvement opportunities. Some of the technologies considered for a conventional USC or SC boiler are recovery of low-grade and waste heat with the integration of ORC and absorption chilling technology, carbon capture from the flue gas, oxy-combustion, desalination. When designing an energy system, the relevance of the ideas and innovations has to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. Power generation efficiency is influenced by a number of factors and operating parameters that include coal type and quality, steam temperature and pressure, boiler design and technology and the type of combustion system, condenser cooling water temperature, location, industrial symbiosis, and industrial clustering. Operating at altitude and prevailing ambient conditions have a negative impact on efficiency. Thermal power generation at coastal regions utilizing wet cooling technology will provide electricity most efficiently. There is between 3 and 5% energy improvement when compared to plant at higher altitudes utilizing dry cooling technology for identical power generating capacities. Additionally, generating power close to load centers will reduce transmission losses and assist with balancing the power grid. The combined effect of better generating efficiency, lower transmission losses, and generation close to the point of consumption will conservatively reduce the net carbon emissions footprints between 120 and 150 kilograms of CO2 per megawatt hour for a coastal installation. Heli-thermal power generation technologies will provide electricity with a comparatively lower emissions profile. The average CO2 at the point of generation for an ESCOM fleet is around 1 ton per megawatt hour compared to around 700 kilograms per megawatt hour for Heli technology.
Sorry to interrupt.
The opportunities for a coastal installation. You can use seawater for an FDG.
Vinesh, you've got 3 more minutes. Can you wrap up, please?
Sorry?
You've got 3 more minutes to conclude the presentation.
Okay. I'll just go, okay, I'll skip the slide, but there are huge advantages for a coastal installation compared to an inland installation. If you look at the financial benefit of an inland installation, definitely there are advantages. And LCOE for inland is roughly 1,467 rands per megawatt hour compared to 1,400 in the coastal installation. This slide just shows you quickly some integration or industrial symbiosis. If it is at a seawater, if seawater cooling is used, one can install a desalination plant to recover clean water. This slide shows quickly some of the hybrid hybrid power generation technologies that can be included for more power efficient or lowering emissions. Some of the, this is one of the plants in Poland, a supercritical CFB technology, which is operational. Kusili power plant with its wet FGD reaching removal efficiencies of up to 93%. Ultra supercritical applications in China. IGCC demonstration plant in Japan with designs now reaching 540 megawatts per IGCC plant. In concluding, coal has suffered setbacks owing to environmental policies and market distortions. The focus of cleaner coal technologies is on addressing emissions rather than getting rid of a fuel. The implementation of CCT technologies is a solution to the continued use of coal. Healy technology and efficiency improvement concepts facilitate the quickest pathway to CO2 reduction. Research projects is the best way to determine which technologies are fit for purpose and implementable for the qualities of coal used. A holistic approach must be used for effective climate mitigation solutions because emissions do not occur at the smokestack only. Identify demonstration projects and prove potential of CCT through government and industry partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vinesh. Thanks very much. I think you have actually made the case for collaboration. And I also see in some of the comments, people are actually advocating for collaboration between the private sector and the public sector in terms of advancing the clean coal technology options. I will remind people that we're now coming to the stage where we're going to consider the questions that are in the Q&A. And we've got Bongani online to indicate the questions and the relevant panelist who needs to answer that question. Bongani, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lesofi. And good morning to all. We are just going to we're just going to ask the questions, perhaps field 2 or 3 questions at a time, and then we'll ask any of the panelists, to be honest, to answer the questions. And I see that one of the questions is directed to Mr. Ndlovu, who has since left. He just made the presentation. He had mentioned that he won't be around for the whole session. But anybody will answer or handle these questions in the panel. The first question then was directed to Mr. Ndlovu. It says, these technologies and innovations, good morning, Mr. Ndlovu. These technologies and innovations in coal, are there countries we can learn from that have implemented them? Where these technologies successful, how will these technologies address the socio-economic and environmental challenges of South Africa? Will they leave communities better off? And this question is from, these questions are from Andres Motawu. To read the second question before I pass it on to the panelists. This is from Lisa Stein. President Ramaphosa's economic recovery plan mentions clean coal technologies playing a role in securing SA's energy future. Do we know what role government plans to play in this regard? I think let's have these 2 questions first, and then we'll then proceed. Continue here.
Okay. Any of the panelists willing to answer these questions? Can I start with you, Davis? Davis? Mr. Cook? Okay, I think we'll pack those questions for when we have one of the panelists to answer.
Can I, Mr. Lesotho?
Or do me or you want to answer now before you even make your
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment in as far as the first question was asked. And it's as far as these emissions, you should look at them as resources. And as long as we see them as resources and use them as resources, it will always be economically and socially viable. So yes, it's possible. And I think I will touch on it within my discussion later on this morning.
Thanks, Dumi. I think the question from Lisa Stein we'll pack it for now and come back to it later. Any other set of questions, Bongani?
Okay. But thank you, Pranix. I also noticed that Dr. Nandi had answered that question from Lisa Stein on the platform. The other question is from, let me just go there. We have a comment from Rajesh. It's not necessarily a question. Maybe I can just read it. It says, interesting discussion. I think it's not new technologies that require further R&D, but a decision to use the technologies of clean coal, CO2 sequestration, opportunities from CO2 capture for synfuels. And then it continues to say the opportunities and benefits are phenomenal for the industry and environment. A question from Stanley Simelane. It says, due to air quality and climate change costs associated with the coal sector, finance institutions are withdrawing investments and finance availability for the coal sector investments moving forward. The question then is, how will this challenge be resolved? Maybe let me ask another question before we can ask the panelists to respond. This is from Helene Mary Stender. Do banks in practice provide loans for implementation of clean coal technologies? What other funding mechanisms are available for developing and implementing clean coal or remediation technologies? So those are the two questions for now.
Thank you, Bongani. I think from the experts, is there any takers for these questions in terms of the financing challenges of funding code projects?
It's Vinesh. Can I answer or give you my thoughts?
Sure.
The biggest challenge you would find, a lot of the technologies that can be used to make coal cleaner is not traditionally used in a power generating situation. A lot of these technologies are used in other industries, and unfortunately, you would find a lot of the financiers or bankers don't seem to connect these two together. The first thing they will ask you, has this technology been implemented in a power plant? The answer is no. The main reason being that those technologies are working in other fields, for example, the gas industry. I mean, if you look at LNG process, for example, when the raw gas comes out of the ground, it contains a lot of CO2, and you cannot include CO2 in the liquefaction process. But when you talk about carbon capture in a power plant, they say, no, it's not been used, it's a new technology, but yet the same processes are being used. And there are numerous similar sort of types of examples, which shows that sometimes the banks or the financiers don't actually understand the technologies and how they can be integrated into the power sector or the coal value chain.
Chair, if I can add something as well, please.
Okay, go ahead, Davis.
Thank you. So I think the other element is what is the nature of the technology and how is it being applied from an investment point of view. So to distinguish between a large capital build, let's say that, and I'm taking a very kind of left-wing approach here, but I think it's quite important. Let's say that you are a tech startup who is looking at implementing some sort of solution to reduce emissions by X%. I can guarantee that you will find venture capital, and that includes the banks, that would be willing to put capital into and risk capital into developing those technologies to get them to commercial. So I think it depends both on whether you're building like kind of large capital build kind of programs, but also if you have smaller point solutions to address water or CO2 or NOx or whatever the case is, if you can demonstrate as a startup a viable commercial pathway, you will receive funding for that.
Thanks, Davis. Bongani?
Okay. The next set of questions, we have Helena Marie stand again. The question is, how can integrated gasification combined cycle technology of ramping up and scaling down energy, how capable is integrated gasification combined cycle technology of ramping up and scaling down energy production? Can it be used to offset fluctuations in renewable energy generation? Let me go to the second question. This is from Sisa Njikalana. Are calculations on cost of renewables accurate? Do such calculations include the cost and environmental impact of material of solar and wind energy specifically? So those two, we can pause here for now.
Yes, I think let's pause on those questions and ask Vinesh to take the first one on the IGCC technology.
Yeah, unfortunately, the IGCC, if you look at the turbine generating technology, turbine generators, they don't, what can I say, ramp up and down very, very quickly due to the operating temperatures in excess of 1,600 degrees C. So there is a natural sort of ramp up and ramp down. They do not respond instantaneously. And the other thing, I might just comment also on the renewable portion. I mean, everybody talks about renewable as being cheap and the technologies to go for. But if you look at in the situation we are in, we somehow rather need to have backup to renewables to actually support its fluctuation. And those technologies, be it either the coal plant idling or a gas turbine idling or a gas engine that is sitting in there waiting to be ramped up, those costs are not actually used in a lot of instances to calculate the true cost of your renewables. Again, everybody seems to just concentrate at the point of generation. The point of generation does not give you the full picture. It's just part of a picture. One needs to look at the full value chain of power generation in a holistic way to actually see what the true cost of alternative technologies or alternative generation is.
Thank you, Vinesh. Now, in terms of the other questions that I see, I think most of the questions pertain actually to the funding of the deployment of the technologies and actually coal to power plants as to which financial markets actually does this. And I think we went in much more detail on this issue in the first breakfast seminar that we had. So I wonder whether Bongani, can you give us a high-level report on the funding issues, the funding debates? Because from a multilateral perspective, because of the Paris agreement, I think funding from the multilateral organizations are much more constrained. Bongani?
Yes, that is true, but it's in the breakfast we had last year, where we had the Standard Bank and the PIC. The issue was not so much that they do not finance coal projects, but the project had to be basically clean coal technologies, and they also had to make business sense. So it wasn't necessarily that they are against coal, and I think to date that's still the position from local financiers as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. In your assessment of the questions, have we dealt with all the questions? The ones that we don't have answers to, I think we'll respond by email.
Yes, we've dealt with most of the questions. The others are comments which I think are useful, that perhaps the panelists can take them offline with the people that have made these comments.
Okay, thank you. I think we still have a bit of time for the questions, but if there are no questions, I would suggest that we proceed, and we'll always catch up at the end of the session. We also have got another session of a question and answer session. So, Dr. Nandi, if you are ready, and Kirsten, can you give us the option of Nandi coming forward and making her presentation on the future of coal beyond power generation? Nandi, over to you.
Thank you, Program Director. Let me fix my slides. Okay. Are my slides visible?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Okay, thank you. The title of my presentation today is The Future of Coal Beyond Power Generation. As I've been introduced, I'm Nandi Malumbazo from the School of Chemical and Metallurgical Engineering at Wits. So the content of my presentation, I will go through the uses of coal. I will also cover up the coal economy in South Africa and the meaning of just energy transition. I will also look at available opportunities or new industries from coal, which are the extraction of critical raw materials and rare earth elements from coal and coal fly ash, the gas opportunities, the circulating fluidized bed combustion for IPPs, as well as carbon capture, utilization, and storage. As we all know that coal has got various uses. Coal is used in electricity production, steel production, cement industry, paper and aluminium, as well as chemical and pharmaceutical, and coal to liquid, as well as coal to gas for synfuels, as well as in plant fertilizers. What is the current economy landscape of coal in South Africa? As Mr. July has said, in 2019, the country managed to produce 258.5 million tons of coal, which was valued at 141.1 billion rands, and that amounted to 94,297 direct employment in the mining sector. And currently, coal is the second largest employer in the mining sector. The local sales, meaning the domestic sales for coal, amounted to 194 million tons per annum, which were used for local sales, which were valued at 86 billion rands. And then coming to that 194 million tons per annum of local sales, 120 of such was for Eskom, for electricity generation, and 42 million tons of such was for Sasol, your synfuels and other products, and 34 million tons of such was for other uses, which is your fertilizers, your cement industry, as well as your metallurgical industry. And as we all know that currently, almost 85% of the country's electricity supply is from coal, which of that has got a value of 177 billion rands, and that has got, direct employment of 48,622 jobs at Eskom. And then below, as you can see, that these are just the final value added products that can be attained from coal or that are produced from coal, which mostly are from your Sasol processes. So what are the challenges around coal usage? Currently, as we all know, we've got renewable energy, which it is believed that renewable energy is cheap. It is cheap for a short term, but I'm not sure about the long term of it. And then we've got financial distress at Eskom. And this is not the only challenge for South Africa. I think most countries, we have financial distress at the power utilities. And we've got air pollution regulations, which also South Africa is the main signatory country of the Paris Agreement, as well as water scarcity. But other countries have got coal shortages. In South Africa, we don't really have coal shortages. As we all know that there was a publication that was published in 2013, which states that the country still has got 66 billion tons of coal available. So the question that we should be asking ourselves is, what can we do with the resources that we still endowed with? So looking at the energy transition, it should be about a reliable base load that is needed to actually support the economic growth of the country. Should also enhanced by the deployment of, it should be enhanced by the deployment of renewable energy technologies, as well as more advanced power generation technologies, which are your HELE technology, to achieve a low carbon economy. So the new normal can be defined differently, and it is a different, like the concept of just energy transition is a diverse concept. So how do we then plan our energy transition? We can look at the energy architecture. Energy architecture is designed to support the energy triangle. Energy triangle, which has got 3 pillars: your economic growth and development, your energy access and security, and your environmental sustainability. So the energy triangle should be able to, the energy triangle should be able to support your physical elements, which includes your energy sources as well as your energy carriers and its end markets. And this energy triangle should also be able to bring balance to your civil society, to your government, as well as our social needs in the country. And lastly, the energy triangle has got also some limiting factors, which are our hydrocarbon or our fossil fuel reserves, which we do not lack any in the country. But then the issue that we have, or another limitation that we might have, is the water availability and the land availability, as well as our geographic setting, as well as climate. So managing the energy transition, how do we go about doing this? The just energy transition, as I've said, it's not a fixed set of rules, but a vision and process based on a dialogue between our social elements, which are your governments, your civil society, as well as the industry or the investors. So analysis of the impact of energy transition is very crucial, more especially on jobs and economic development of the country. So the country's aim to green economy should make sure that it eradicate or reduce poverty in the coal hub provinces. The question that one needs to ask, what will determine if SA is ready for energy transition, or how far are we, or are we there yet? So our just energy transition readiness is actually determined by 4 indicators, and those are your social, it's your social elements, your political, meaning your regulation, economy, as well as your technology. When looking at the social impact or the social elements, you actually look at the public awareness and acceptance of just energy transition. So meaning that in South Africa, are we there yet in terms of accepting that we are on just, or are we there as yet in terms of accepting just energy transition? And secondly, under social, we also need to look at human capital, which is the type of education that we have, the type of health that we have, all the social impacts that contribute to a good society. They should also be taken into consideration when you are looking at the social elements. Secondly, looking at the political or the regulations. So political, when looking at this, we look at the political will and the compliance, as well as the regulatory indicator for sustainable energy. We have seen that in the country, in South Africa, we have your IRP, which was released in 2019, which actually formulates or is for an energy mix. And in such, there's still clean coal technology research and development that was mentioned in the IRP. So looking at the third indicator, which is the economy, we have to look at the financial market sector soundness. Are we there yet in the country? Is there an ease of doing business in South Africa? And also the ease of doing business in South Africa is also linked to the political will as well as compliance. As we've just seen on another session, on the previous session, we have mentioned that there are banks that are willing, and then there are other banks that are not actually willing to fund the clean coal technologies. And lastly, another indicator that should be looked at is the technology. Currently, we have carbon lock-in, which is your decommissioning of some Eskom power plants. That's how South Africa has is going to manage to actually do carbon lock-in, to lock the carbon that we are emitting so that we don't emit more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And then lastly, we need to look at the infrastructure and innovation, which is what we are here about today, innovation. So I've also looked at the publications on Science Direct that mentioned just energy transition. There's been an increase on the scientific publication that were published in the recent years from 1994, as you can see on this slide, that at least just energy transition is getting enough attention scientifically. And such information is actually crucial for each and every country so that we can then be able to see what gaps are there in our just energy transition strategy as a country, and what can we learn from other countries. So there is a scientific evidence on just energy transition from other countries that we can learn from. Then the future of coal in South Africa, moving away from just energy transition. Looking at the political will, I've mentioned that we have an IRP 2019. Currently, South Africa contributes to 2% of the world's coal fleet, which is number 15, is the 15th country as a CO2 emitter. So the IRP has actually stated that by 2030, we have seen on the IRP itself that Eskom will still be using 110 million tons per annum of coal, which is currently where we are at. And by 2040, that amount will be reduced to 61 million tons per annum of coal, which amounts to almost 55% of coal usage for Eskom. Therefore, That statement means that the country still have got 19 years to come up with solution on upskilling and sustaining the economy generated from coal power generation industry. That means a clear coal research and development strategy is needed. There are possible options that we can, or that the country can actually look at. And these are the clean energy, which is extraction of rare earth elements from coal for clean energy, as well as for IR products, your electronics. We can also look at coal mine rehabilitation programs to recover land damage through mining or coal mining for economical development of the country for agricultural usage. Also, other opportunities, there are opportunities when it comes to gas, your coal bed methane. Coal bed methane can be explored in coal fields which have got deep coal seams. And we can also look at underground coal gasification, which is your currently, there's a pilot project next to Majuba Power Station, which belongs to Eskom for UCG. And we can also look at the CFB, the circulating fluidized bed combustion, which can actually deal with our low quality coals. And lastly, we do have a project in the country for carbon capture, utilization, and storage, which can then, we can actually use the CO2 that is produced by Eskom as well as Sasol and convert such into various products if we cannot store. So looking at the first opportunity, which is critical raw materials and rare earth elements opportunities. Currently, I'm currently doing research studies on critical raw materials and rare earth elements opportunities in the country in collaboration with UJ. I've got some postgrad students that started last year in trying to map as to where can we actually be able to extract or source CRMs as well as REE, and on what type of coal can we then be able to do such. So what is CRMs? CRMs, it's metals and minerals which are of high economic importance to a particular industry or sector or spatial area and are at risk of supply shortage. Currently, we know that in South Africa, we're actually not mining, or we are actually mining rare earth elements, but not in huge volumes. So the issue there with rare earth elements, and the reason why we're not actually mining it in huge volumes, it's because there are still some challenges when it comes to how can then we process rare earth elements from the ore. Another option is to source out these rare earth elements or critical raw materials from coal and coal fly ash, as well as in acid mine drainage. So by doing this, we're actually also trying to rehabilitate the land from coal fly ash and also coal mine dumps. We're actually trying to rehabilitate and source out new commodities from such. So the critical raw materials are also dependent on the country's supply and demand outlook. Like for instance, we have the USA, which have got, they have managed to publish a list of 35 CRMs, which they are in need in the US. China has got 17 of these. Europe has managed to also publish or catalog 30 of these minerals or metals that they are called rare earth elements for various usages. Looking at this map, the map actually shows various countries which actually have managed to look at the opportunities of critical raw materials or rare earth elements opportunities from actually coal. So as I've mentioned that China has got 17, the USA currently is sitting at 35, and you have Europe currently sitting at 30. South Africa is only have, South Africa can have got your PGM metals as well as your other elements. And it's only for, it's iridium, platinum, rhodium, and ruthenium. And there is a gap to explore the extraction of REEs from coal or coal mine dams or coal fly ash, as well as acid mine drainage. This is an opportunity for the country, instead of the country focusing on what can we use coal for. So we've got opportunities to use coal for anything, like for extraction of critical materials other than power generation. And looking at the global distribution of rare earth elements, the country, if we can look at South Africa, we've got less than, I think, 10 mines that produces rare earth elements. But as I've mentioned, that the critical challenge that comes with the extraction of rare earth elements from the ore, it's actually the processing side, where actually we are in need of R&D, of research and development opportunities that will then enable us to actually process rare earth elements from ore. But as well as we can look at extraction of rare earth elements from coal. So if we extract rare earth elements, what products can we actually be able to generate or produce from these? Firstly, rare earth elements, there are only 17 of these. You've got your light rare earth elements and you've got your heavy rare earth elements. Your light rare earth elements, you can extract them, and then they are actually useful in the application of your electronics, your light bulbs, your optics, your cordless power tools, wind turbines, which is your green energy, as well as in the automotive catalyst or sector. And then your heavy rare earth elements, they can actually be used in your rechargeable batteries, defense force for your smartphones, as well as your earphones or your speakers. And currently, I think most of these products, we actually import them from China. So we can stop the importing part and actually be able to create a new industry from rare earth elements. So US rare earth elements usage. The US currently uses rare earth elements in the catalyst sector, and 62% of rare earth elements are used in this catalytic sector. And then 13% of such is used in the metallurgical industry, 9% is used in the glass polishing and ceramics, 7% of such is used in the magnet, and 3% is used in the phosphorus industry, and then 6% in your wastewater treatment or radiation monitoring. US, as well as Europe, as well as China, they have collaborative solution in developing a new industry in critical elements or critical raw materials, as well as rare earth elements in coal-based material. And the US government, together with industries, they have an annual budget of $23 million up until 2027. This project started in 2018, and US is far ahead when it comes to the rare earth elements extraction or critical elements extraction from coal. They have, because this project is currently divided into 3 phases. You have your mapping, which is you need to know as to what type of coal can you actually be able to get huge quantities of rare earth elements from. And the second phase is actually the extraction of such rare earth elements from coal. And then the third phase will be then the application or the utilization. Currently in the country, we're still on phase 1. As I've mentioned earlier, that I'm currently doing research projects on this topic, as well as with UJ. We're trying to actually map as to what type of coal can we actually get huge amounts of, or huge quantities of rare earth elements from. Is it possible to get rare earth, such REEs or critical elements from anthracite or from your bituminous coal? So the mapping part is very crucial, so that at the end of the day, we can actually be able to say what coal mine dumps or what type of coal can we actually tackle for the extraction of REEs as well as critical elements from coal. So looking at the gas opportunities, this is a map that is published, or that was published by the Petroleum Agency of South Africa. As you can see on this map, we actually have green blocks, which these green blocks are actually, they show the companies that have actually applied and those that have got a permit to extract gas and from these coal fields. So currently there are activities looking at the extraction of gas from coal or deep coal seams, as you can see in this map. And then secondly, we also have an opportunity for underground coal gasification, which Eskom is currently active in. And going further, looking at the circulating fluidized bed combustion for IPPs, as we all know that currently the coal quality that we have is very low. It has got high ash content. So what else can we do? Because on the IRP itself, there is still some allocation of building coal power plants, but then for IPPs. We can actually look at the circulating fluidized bed technology, as Vinesh has mentioned, which can actually is a technology that is, or that will be very suitable for the type of coal that we have in South Africa. And here are some case studies when it comes to such technologies. We have a South Korean power plant, which is 550 megawatts. And this is a mixture of Indonesian coal as well as biomass. And this power plant has got an efficiency, a net plant efficiency of 42.4%. And the South Korean government, they will go in operation, commercial operation for this plant in 2024. So this is one example that we have in South Korea. And by the way, most of the Asian countries, they are actually building coal power plants, but using clean coal technology. Another example is the Kenya Amu Clean Coal Power Station project, which currently, when it comes to technology, this ultra supercritical power plant is actually very efficient. It goes to an efficiency of 49% and actually reduces SOx and NOx and particulate matter by more than 99%. But then currently the issue with this power plants, it's not the technology itself. It's their environmental organization which are against the build of this power plant in Kenya. So this project is still on hold due to such environmental groups that are against the building of this power plant. But then this shows that clean coal technology is actually doable and it's out there. And if we have a country in Africa that is actually for a particular clean coal technology, why can't we in South Africa? And lastly, looking at the carbon capture, utilization and storage. Currently, the country has managed to go to do a research studies to look for potential geological storage site. And they've managed to find actually 4 site, which some are offshore and some are onshore, for the storage of CO2 that is currently produced by Eskom and Sasol. And when it comes to capture, I think the technologies that we have in the country, we can actually capture CO2. So the issue or the main focus area that we are currently embarking on as a country should be then the storage as well as utilization. So looking at the storage, I'm aware that there's a project that is currently looking at the injection, which is our first test site injection on the Zululand Basin on 2 wells. But then I'm not sure how far this project is. But as well, we can actually, in the meantime, whilst we are looking for CO2 storage, we can actually also look for, we can actually explore CO2 utilization. And as you can see, that CO2, the captured CO2, can actually be used in various streams. CO2 can actually be used in the mineralization. Yes,
Nandi,
Mr.
sorry to interrupt. You've got another 3 or 4 minutes left, so okay. You can.
Thank you. So the captured CO2 can actually be used in the chemical industry, in your plastic industry, in your fuel recovery. For instance, the country is currently going for shale gas exploration. CO2 can be used it can actually be used instead of injecting your shale wells with water. You can actually inject your wells with CO2 instead of water, because we're water scarce. We don't really have water in the country. So there are various CO2 utilization pathways or industries that can actually be explored. But then this need also a financial muscle from the industry. And in conclusion, as I've said, just energy transition is a diverse concept which can be interpreted differently depending on which table you sit in. And then the coal industry still has got almost 2 decades to figure out the strategy towards coal economy. And raw materials for green economy can be extracted from coal to reduce the import of the primary raw materials for the green economy, your wind turbines, as well as your solar. We can actually extract this from these resources from coal. And as you have seen, there's a dynamic link between coal and coal to gas to power technologies. Cleaner coal technologies and gas are part of should be part of just energy transition for power generation. And I think the coal industry need to have a refocus to look at coal beyond power generation and see what more industries can we actually generate from coal, as well as the CO2 captured during coal utilization. And coal economy can then still grow if there is a will from the policymakers as well as the investors. I would like to thank you.
Thanks very much, Nandi. Again, people still got an opportunity to post their questions on the Q&A panel for the panelists to answer. We'll move to the next speaker. It's Tumi Khomo, the CEO of Global Engineering. I think Tumi has intervened in terms of trying to answer questions earlier by indicating that the byproducts of the burning of coal is actually another opportunity that should be explored. And I think he's going to take us down that path in terms of how that exploitation can take place. Tumi, over to you.
Thanks, Mr. Lucifer. And thank you everybody for attending. Just sharing my screen at the moment. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yeah. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tumi Khomo. I'm the CEO of EPCM Global Engineering. I am a technology seller, And I will share some ideas with you on how to manage the coal emissions challenge. But from the industry where I come from, as an engineering firm, we work in what we call a MECT environment, which is a maximum achievable control technology. And therefore, a lot of the things we will speak to you about will commonly be unfamiliar, but really established technologies within the sector. Okay, so I'm going to look at the introduction, the magnitude of the emissions problem, the configuration of the solution, and really speak to some programs and technology partners that we could have going forward. So what do? We look at fixing the big problems, whether it's emissions, water scarcity, fly ash, and we do it through a number of principles, which is applying consulting services or delivering projects or specialized staffing in dealing with the issue. But at the corner of this thing is that we use a lot of technology that has been established that maybe only exists in the defense sector or in the nuclear sector, but is available to the rest of the world. Now, how big is the problem? The biggest challenge is that we mine coal, and this endowment called coal is every South African citizen's right to derive benefit. But unfortunately, the value chain has run into a number of challenges where you can see within the presentation, you have high emitters like Eskom and Sasol. And if you look at the graph going up, it's the CO2 levels, and then across is the concentration. And you can see that Eskom produces relatively high quantity of CO2, but at low concentrations as opposed to the synfuel sector. And we try and resolve that problem simultaneously. And going forward, we must remember that if we are to continue to exploit this endowment called coal, we must do it in a responsible manner that makes everybody comfortable that we're acting in everybody's interest. So what are the challenges? With challenges that even Eskom is struggling with security of supply issues. There's a perception that coal is dirty. Yes, it's dirty if it's not managed. It's like any other process. But if managed correctly, it can be clean and can be used successfully going forward. I mean, for example, I heard Nandi speaking of OECD. OECD anticipates that 15% of the world's energy production will still come from coal in 2050. So we must really wear a different hat around the prospects, the timeframes involved. And by the time we reach that point, are we market leaders? Are we successful at what we do? The second thing is that there's a desired future, which looks at self-generation, the utilization of coal and discard coal. So there is a way you can use discard coal and use it successfully, reach near zero compliance, and really look at merging coal, the primary energy of coal, with renewables to create a new environment. This is how we make coal fit for the future. So how does the technology work? I will say it's very simple, but it's not, but let's start there. So what we do is we use an activated carbon, which has holes in it, and we inject the activated carbon with specific chemicals and compounds to break down the flue gases into different chemical streams. So how we do it, if we look at the diagram, before this, we have what we call a cyclone scrubber, which brings down the temperature of the flue gas so that it works within our reactor. And excuse me. Oh, and what we do is then we, from the cyclone scrubber, we start to deal with a PM and PM 2.5, which is really the problem. It's the fine dust particles that come through your nose and land up in your lungs because your body does not have systems to manage those. So we scrub that all out in our cyclone scrubber. We bring the flue gas to a cold temperature of below 60 degrees and we push it through our activated carbon. Now, the advantage of this activated carbon is threefold. First is that you have huge surface areas upon which the reaction can take place. Second thing is that we can deal with a change in volume and concentration simultaneously. So where you typically have a startup of a boiler or a system where you burn, we can deal with the outflows. It does not change. In other plants, you'll find that the emissions at that point at startup and at shutdown tend to increase. In our case, it does not increase. So this is one of our technologies. It's called the sulfur-acid solution. And in there, we put the flue gas and we extract the SO2 using air and a bit of water or weak acid or reclaimed water, and we produce a sulfuric acid, which ranges in concentration between 30 and 50% concentration levels. And we can also increase the concentration. But the important bit is that we only produce less than 50 grams normal cubic meters of SO2 in the gas post this stage of scrubbing. Now, we replicate this process to extract different elements, but the strategy here was to keep the technology simple, no moving parts. It's a simple and robust system that can manage most industries. Remember that this technology originates from the defense sector, and therefore the MAC principle applies. So in many cases, we can scrub up to 99% of the emissions out of the flue gas. And because it's a volumetric system, we can always adjust according to the client's requirements. The second thing is that the reliability, the gas flow, we only have to replace this activated carbon once every 10 years. It's guaranteed for 10 years. But in other plants, we've seen it go for up to 18 years without requiring removal. What else do we know is that the design of the reactor is that it's got no moving parts, and therefore the chances of it breaking down are very unlikely. But the important bit is that this is a cold process. This process for our entire process runs at ambient pressure and temperature. And I suspect many of you who work in the sector or work with process plants will understand that it's a significant cost saving and an operational saving. So how does it work? In a typical power plant, let's say in Eskom, you would have your turbine there and you would then have your generator, and the flue gas would then come through your fabric filters and then out through your ID fan. And that's where we do the installation just before the flue stack. And then we push the clean air by the flue stack. We have two options, or we have more options. The other option we have available is when we attain a zero carbon footprint, where we use green technologies to produce green ammonia, which is important in capturing the CO2. And then we convert all these chemicals into commodities, industrial commodities or agrarian commodities. Okay, so in many cases where you install this kind of technologies, you end up with a scenario where you could be repurposing a site. So where typically a Hendrina, if we assume this was a Hendrina, all their discard coal, which they avoid burning because of the CO2 levels, are now available if you install a technology of this nature. And we use ammonia, green ammonia, to actually capture the CO2, and we then recycle it through the process. And we then produce basically 3 or 2 sellables, which are the salts themselves, sellable ammonium bicarbonate or nitrate salts. And then we also produce sulfuric acid of various concentrations. The PM and the heavy metals are typically taken away and put into a cement kiln, or where the concentrations are leveled out as per industry requirements. So these are the number of configurations we have of the different scrubbing solutions, and it's all determined by the client themselves what they want to scrub. Certain clients only want to scrub SO2, so we'll do the particulate matter and the SO2. In other cases, they want to do away with NOx, and in the case of NOx, we just basically split the NOx into N2 and O2. And then release it into the environment, which is what we breathe on a daily basis. And then in as far as mercury is concerned, we then have, if there's a heavy mercury component, we then install our co-absorbent reactor, and that deals with the absorption of these heavy metals so that they can be extracted completely. The important bit is that every client tends to determine what they want out of the flue gas. And then within the other industries, they tend to say, let's do the minimum. But what they don't realize is because these different reactors are stacked into one unit, it doesn't make a difference whether you do one now and then 2 years down the line, you want to change the reconfiguration. I have to build a new plant. But typically, if you tell us, this is how I receive the environment, this is what I need to reach within a 20 or 30-year environment, we can build a plant that scrubs to that level. Our latest addition is the CO2 capture. We've been running a demonstration plant in Luxembourg since 2010, where we scrub CO2 in an urban setting at 99%, and it has been running till date. So it was actually decommissioned last year, and now they're installing a full-scale unit on site. So what does this mean? So typically, the other presenters have spoken that when you have SOx, you then have FGD, but they also don't mention that limestone with SOx creates more CO2. That's one system. And then you have the NOx, which you have low NOx burners to manage. You have then your ESPs to try and deal with the dust, but then you find sometimes there's difficulty with the ESPs, and then you add a bit of lime. So dust is more dust, It's the resulting equation. And then the issue of capture and storage. I strongly believe that once you've captured the CO2, there are so many applications for CO2 that can fit into the circular economy, but no one is going to invest money in researching those until we are willing to go down that route. For example, some of the examples that we have not spoken about today is that CO2 is consumed by algae. It's also consumed by plankton and can be a key feedstock for the ocean's economy. And then we move on to H2S, which is typically found in refining industries, and that too can be scrubbed out specifically. And then really the COMBUSTION usually deals with those three. Now, why I'm talking about this is because these are separate plant installations, as opposed to what we have tried to do is integrate everything into a single unit and scrub everything and produce a sellable commodity. And what does that mean if you do that? Your CAPEX you invest, and then your operational costs are an ongoing cost and therefore are reduced or added to your operating cost overall. But in our plant, we are saying you invest the same amount of money as a single unit, an SOx unit, and you then produce sellables, and those sellables then offset your cost of abatement, and you then begin to make a profit. Now, it's also important that the South African government take a deliberate view on what chemicals they would like to see in production and what role they want to play in the chemical 4IR environment. But for me as a service provider, you say what chemicals you want, we then convert to those required chemicals. So in these greenhouse gases, non-greenhouse gases and greenhouse gases environment, you'll see that they're classified into 8 categories. And the first one is to look at coal-fired power stations where you see the PM level is 50, your SOx is 500, and your NOx is 750. And then on the far end where you have your incinerators, which are biohazardous materials and all kinds of things. Why I'm bringing these two together is because we are seeing more and more a mixture of burning in the different industries. So we then also have to manage that at the same time. These regulations were in place from now to April 2020, and many of the organizations have asked for extensions. Yeah, it's one of those things. But we have installed a plant in Duffin Creek in the USA, and you can see to what level we scrub the flue gases. And in many cases in North America, we are the standard for scrubbing emissions. And then when it comes to greenhouse gases, which is the CO2, so it's a pure taxable scenario. So they tax you until you manage to abate these. And I think it's also one of the strategies that will help us in dealing with the issues. Okay, so do we have demonstration plants? We have a number of demonstration plants. I'll touch on the ones. In Africa, we have one in Morocco, at OCP, and we scrub up to 98% because they use the sulfuric acid for their fertilizer manufacturer. manufacturing. We then also have in Codelco, Chile, they use our system, and they use the sulfuric acid for leaching the copper and curing some of the metals. And then we have another plant in Jacksonville, which is a mint production plant. Again, also we also scrub to very low levels, and they also use their sulfuric acid. So you can turn the sulfuric acid into the business. For example, in Eskom, it can be used to demonize the water, which drives the turbines. In terms of plants globally, these are the types of plants we've done globally. And yeah, the proof is in the pudding. The technology is not new. It came from as far as the U-boats during the Second World War. And now we are now going into the various industries. But if you note, it's only the chemical industries that have adopted, and therefore the coal burning industries have not started. Okay, just transition. How does this work? Nangi has spoken. There are particularly industry requirements, current sector. Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt. You've got another 3 minutes to wrap up.
Yes, sir. Pleasure. And we look at your business value proposition. It's really based on financing and proposition versus your customers. We believe you can meet and manage both non-greenhouse gases and greenhouse gases by doing a number of things. So if you install our technology, which has a 30-year headroom, you then become compliant, and the equitable transition happens in the sense that you don't have to change your systems or change your investments. So it's a preservation of assets, but there's also sellables into the agrarian network, which then also makes it a profitable solution, and therefore makes you socially investable, which is one of the questions I saw. One of the key elements is that we always, when we look at technology, it's performance, reliability, ease of use, then the price. If you consider what you're getting for the price, you might change your mind. And at the bottom is really that if we abate Eskom's issues and Sasol's issues, we can deal with job security issues, we can deal with job preservation, and I think that's what makes it an equitable transition. Okay, we've spoken about this. I think the profitability. So what am I proposing? I'm proposing that the mining sector consider running an intervention on behalf of their clients, whether it's Sasol, whether it's Eskom, install a plant on their behalf, as we have done in the formulation of Eskom, and exchange it for a commercial arrangement. And I think that's what makes the value chain affordable. Besides this, I don't think the coal value chain is viable if the mining sector does not run an intervention. I think it's everybody's sector, and you can't rely on Eskom because they've been tripping on their own shoelaces. Thank you.
Thanks very much to me. Again, people, if you've got questions, the Q&A tab is there for you to advance those questions. We will immediately go to the next presentation by Alex Kumalo. He's our head of social performance at the Minerals Council, and he's going to make a presentation on an inclusive development and building a people-centered vision of a modernized coal industry. Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Nix. Good morning, colleagues. It's still the morning. It's been a long day. It feels like the afternoon already. And thanks for having me. I must admit, I am quite on unfamiliar territory. But be that as it may, my passion lies with the people, hence my role in the Minerals Council around social performance, which, as you will all know, is a fancy term for community development. When Bongani asked me to take part in this webinar, I was a little bit hesitant because this just energy transition isn't easy, especially for communities. But be that as it may, I thought maybe I could come onto the platform and tease out some of the challenges that we need to deal with as an industry, as host communities, as government, and as other industries along our value chain. So I thought I would just start by looking at what the majority of the economies of the coal fields look like. You would ordinarily have, let me see if I can share my screen. Next, to advise me if you can see my screen.
Not yet. Yeah, now we can see it.
Great. All right. The economy in the coal fields is largely an energy economy with coal mines and generally our customer being Eskom. So if you look at Lephalale, you have the old power station, Matimba. You have the new one that does not work very well, B2P. And you have the large mine that supplies those two power stations. It's really an energy economy. We might not be calling it that, but that's what it is. You also have a fairly developed service industry, engineering and logistics, but that also supports the very same energy economy. In terms of the retail economy, is consumerist, it's not investment based, but it also depends on that energy economy. Heavy industries, the likes of Highveld Steel in Columbus, if you look at the Ngangala district, when they were up on their feet, they also needed the energy economy to survive. If you look at the Sasol side, Khasaband district, petrochemicals, by and large, part of the energy economy. You've got agriculture, but we've really limited exploitation of the agribusiness value chain. And you find that, we really end up with just either growing potatoes in Bethal or Delmas, and we're doing very little else along that agribusiness value chain. And where I really get concerned, it's when we talk about, the township economies. In each and every mining jurisdiction, be it coal or platinum, the township economy is very weak. And yet that is where the vast majority of our people live. And in most of these coal fields, we've got a fairly underdeveloped tourism economy. Again, if you go to Lephalale, you'll know that there's Valvater, which has got a high-end tourism market, which excludes the vast majority of people in that area. If you look at the Witbank coalfields, Emalahleni coalfields, tourism is very limited. Quite a number of you, drive through there if you live in Joburg or Pretoria, heading out to the Kruger, and all you know of Emalahleni is that there's a petrol station where you can fill up your vehicle, buy a soft drink on a hot day to cool down, and that's about it. That's your contribution to that economy. So it's clearly inadequate. So we have this concentration within the energy economy, which provides limited opportunities. So let me touch on something that I don't know very well, but we'll all agree that other than the efficiency and safety factors that modernization brings, the human factor is quite critical. So modernization brings with it serious implications around the nature and structure of employment within the mining industry, especially when it comes to the quality and quantum of skills required. And some of you will know that in places such as Australia, especially around the Pilbara area, which is the iron ore area, quite a number of trucks there have become autonomous. They are operated by some chaps sitting far away from the mine, using a joystick and operating trucks right in the middle of the pit. So the quality of the skills is very, very different from your general worker that you find in a coal mine in a Malasheni. And the quantum of the skills required is also very, very different, because that chap with a joystick could be operating 5 trucks, 10 trucks at the same time, rather than having 10 truck drivers. So we need to really, really understand the requirements for all of the processes that are closely associated with modernization. We need to understand, how which skills we need to identify and how to nurture those skills. And working with the likes of Nandi and academics, we need to make sure that there's accelerated and collaborative development of appropriate curricula, because we don't want to keep on producing engineers that will not have jobs in the future. Those engineers must have skills that the modernized industry will need and utilize. But then we have a challenge with the issue of skills. Skills are very, very portable. They move around. So if you go to the Kalahari, where there's iron ore and manganese, you will find that top-end skills actually are not from the local area. They are from Pretoria, because Stikkies is there. They're from Johannesburg, because UJ and WITS are there. And those institutions provide skills that are then exported by Gauteng or imported by the Northern Cape, to those areas, meaning that the local communities still don't take part, simply because they just don't have the requisite skills, as low as those skills might be in the context of a modernized mining industry. So we need to be really careful around how we rebalance the socioeconomics in the host communities, because as it stands, there is no good balance. And as you modernize, you might find that that imbalance worsens. So what do we need to do? In my view, we need to look at the redevelopment and transformation of the energy economy that prevails in these mining areas, coal mining areas, into something that is a lot more dynamic, diversified, and inclusive. And again, what is inclusive? These are the things that we need to be dealing with. We could import, the technologies that we require. But as Davis Cook earlier said, the systemic solutions are the ones that have got longer lasting impacts. So to modernize, we'll be better off ensuring that, we develop those manufacturing capabilities, to support local modernization efforts. So that we lower the cost of mining by not importing, and then the balance of payments also becomes an issue on a national scale. We would also see lower economic growth if we don't develop those manufacturing capabilities. And obviously, we will not see much in terms of diversification. We will not do well in reducing unemployment. So we will, in fact, reduce employment rather than ensure that with modernization, we create more opportunities over a longer period of time. And also the issue then of fewer local portable skills. We would have to deal with that simply because skills are highly mobile. But also ensuring that we manufacture locally would help us explore the potential of the country to export to other mining economies, and not just the hardware that we'd be able to develop or co-develop, but also the know-how that comes with the journey of modernization. Something that is abundantly obvious to all of us, but we often shy away from. The sun actually does also shine in the coal fields. So we could take the advantage of the electricity transmission infrastructure that is there and develop solar farms that could replace Eskom's aging power stations, or the ones that will be shut over the next 10 to 20 years. One of the challenges with having a lot of sun in the Northern Cape and a lot of and the potential for wind and solar is that the grid is very thin. How do you generate electricity in Aggeneys or Kakamas on the other side of the Orange River to supply industries in Gauteng. Transmission costs are quite high, and it becomes a challenge. So yeah, Mpumalanga, why not look at that? And again, we could be looking at developing some of these solar farms on depleted mines. It is possible. I came across an example of a previously Anglo-owned mine, Drayton, in New South Wales in Australia, which is set to become a solar farm. The water in the pit plays a part in cooling down solar panels and thereby enhancing the efficiency of those solar cells. But also using some of the open pit mines for solar farms would ensure that we don't displace agricultural activities by taking up land that could be used for agriculture and then putting solar panels on it. We then use the land that actually we can't use for agriculture, which is the mines themselves, for those activities. And yeah, one of the challenges with even the new mining charter is that it talks about 5% community ownership and so forth, which ceases to exist when that mine shuts down. So how do we ensure that there's continuity that we can use to ensure that those communities continue to thrive in the post mining space, or in the space where we have modernized the industry to an extent that coal no longer employs 90,000 people, but it employs 45,000 people. It is a possible scenario. Again, we could be creative around some of the deeper cut mines and so forth. But also more importantly, we could look at ensuring that rehabilitation, and I think Davies and Nandi also mentioned this, to ensuring that we've got proper agribusinesses. And often we think of rehabilitating land and we think of growing crops for human consumption. It is a possible avenue, but you might find that some of our rehabilitation does not result in land that can be used for growing crops for human consumption. But what about fibers? I do know that there's quite a lot of work that's been done even by UCT on looking at how we could use rehabilitated mining land to develop industries that are not there. It could be bamboo growing for those fancy floors, for instance, or as inputs into the fiber industry that is currently non-existent in South Africa. So these are the options that you could look at that actually could absorb a lot of the unemployed youth and women in the mining areas. So the last one that I really want to talk about might be a bit controversial. So our regulator will excuse me on this one, but I think we need a radical shift in terms of focus when it comes to mine community development. Remember that as we continue to modernize, we have responsibilities around mine community development. I think we need to encourage government to carry out its constitutional mandate when it comes to social infrastructure, schools, clinics, roads, job creation even. Government, I think, needs to play its part a lot more effectively. That would give us space, for as an industry, especially when we are able to create value propositions that encourage us as an industry to participate in both upstream and downstream mining in the industrial activities. Mining companies used to be conglomerates in the past, and now we talk about core business. So if you are July Lovo at Anglo Coal, core business is mining. Anything that is on either side of that, upstream, downstream, we largely don't get involved in that. But I think we could create those value propositions, and I think some of the presenters have alluded to this domain, in particular, around some of the things that we as an industry could do. But we also need to ensure that we look at our communities, from a different lens. We need to ensure that we understand the assets that exist in our communities, because the assumption that there are no assets in those communities, our communities have got nothing to bring to the table, is false, and we need to deal with that. But we need to ensure that we understand those assets and we find ways of ensuring that we enhance the ability of people to express their creativity and aspirations in a diversified economy. Each time, we deal with community protests in the coal fields in particular, or any mining area for that matter, it is all about how communities can become part of the mining value chain. And that value chain centers around procurement, it centers around jobs. A modernizing mining industry isn't going to create those jobs directly. We've been mining in this country on a commercial scale in terms of coal since 1864. And yet we still have those energy economies that I spoke about at the very beginning. So something needs to give. And I think it's going to be the way we approach communities when it comes to what it is that they can bring to the table. And finally, we need some kind of social contract that brings all of us together under a common vision. There are very, very few communities in South Africa that have a common vision. If you look at areas in Kenya, in Uganda, in Rwanda, where there's successful communities that actually don't have mining, it could be agriculture, they tend to have a common vision. You go to Bangladesh, economies that are led by women in a Muslim country, they have a common vision that binds them together, that assists them to pull in the same direction. I like to use the example of a span of oxen. Those of you who have seen, those animals working hard to plow fields before tractors came along, they need to pull in the same direction for them to be efficient. As soon as the lead ox pulls, to the left, they're normally whipped back into line because you need to pull in the same direction. So we need that common vision that allows us to do this. But we can do this if we are transparent around the implications of what modernization will bring, the challenges of modernization, and the fact that we all need to roll up our sleeves and collectively deal with this. So going forward, I just want to leave you with 2 slides. It's all around imagining a new future. This is a floating solar farm on an abandoned coal mine in Anhui province in China. I am partial to China because I did live there for 2 years, but it is possible to repurpose a coal mine. And the other one is not a coal mine, but it's a quarry just outside of Shanghai in Songjiang. It's a 5-star hotel built on an old disused quarry. And again, it is all about imagining the art of the possible and saying, how do we get there? But you can't get there by picking on a single item to do or to follow. It's got to be systematic. We've got to be in it, and everyone who's in it has got to have some skin in the game. On that note, I would like to leave it there, and we'll be happy to answer some questions later. Next, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Colleagues, we now have an opportunity to look at the questions that have been posed and see if we can answer those, and if we can answer them, to make an undertaking that will answer them by email. Bongani, over to you. Any questions that need to be answered?
Yes, Branix. There's a couple of questions. Some of those questions have been handled by the panelists, but I think in the interest for public interest, I think we still have to read them, and that so that all of us can benefit. The first question is from Sisa Njikalana. To what extent has CCU been developed? What are the benefits as well as costs thereof? And in what way does CCU open opportunities in other applications and industries? I think because this question has got 3 parts, I think we'll just ask this one and then wait for the panelists to respond and go to another.
Hi, Bongani, it's Vinesh.
Yes, Vinesh, thank you.
Yeah, sort of CCU, yeah, it's relatively new, but the types of opportunities you do have for it is converting your carbon dioxide into fine chemicals, which are being imported, which then can create a value for you, or convert it into a fuel, replacing crude oil, which also adds value to you. So a lot of these CCU projects can work. You need to be careful to make sure that you do have an economic payback on them. But as far as industry goes, I mean, you're looking at most of the, well, the whole of the chemical industry and a large extent the oil refining industry. You're replacing a lot of crude with synthetic fuels and synthetic chemicals. So it's a matter of establishing what market your country has got and design systems to suit those. So there is a huge opportunity for job creation and substituting chemicals and fuels which are made from crude or imported products.
Thank you. I would like to make a comment also in as far as Vinesh's comments concerned. There's been substantial investment in developing CCU technologies. One of them we're currently looking at is a 0 ppm diesel or fuel, which then fundamentally changes the emissions for the transport sector. But it's also about integrating some of these into the agrarian platform, straight line costs, crops, food security, and transforming the landscape into an arable landscape is also a third option. We have a lot of dry crops in this country, which are not commonly used because of it's not a popular thing, but I think at the heart of it, food security is an opportunity for us here and globally.
Thank you. Any other questions, Bongani?
The next question is from Helen Mary Stander. To what extent is coal typically enriched to REEs? I noticed that Dr. Nandi had answered this question, but I think in the interest of all of us, for the benefit of all of us, it's important that perhaps she tackles this one. The next question is from...
Sorry, Bongani, but can you just read us this answer so that
okay.
we pass that point?
The answer is, it is dependent on the type of coal. The USA is enriching REE from coal from 300 ppm, and this is all dependent on the extraction method. Perhaps there's also another one from Sisan Jigalana. It was also handled, but it says, is it not more accurate to describe just energy transition as a development of current energy systems and technologies to more advanced forms without replacing some of the systems and technologies? I see that Dr. Nandi also answered here. She says you can look at the jet as a way of not replacing, but to upgrade to more advanced technologies. But the question is, our SA coal power infrastructure is old, and therefore it will be more expensive to upgrade most of them. We also have another one from Helen Mary Stander. We have seen a lot about possible technological solutions for a just energy transition. What social solutions will be needed to make it possible? And does the Minerals Council have plans to support these? I can read the response from Davis Cook. It says there are significant efforts underway by the Minerals Council to innovate around the way companies work with local communities. So innovation around communities engagement. Okay. There are also efforts to develop new data sets and data access portals for shared information using, for example, GIS and satellite technology to improve social-related decision-making. This was most recently used in the COVID-19 pandemic to inform some parts of the industry's response. So part of the thinking is around how to maximize the benefits intersecting technology and social or citizen needs. Perhaps I can leave it there for now. Maybe they would want to expand, the panelists, on these points.
Okay, any panelists who wants to expand on the answers?
So thank you. If I can jump in, it's Davis here. Yes, absolutely. I think one of the core ideas is that the idea of innovation that the Minerals Council has adopted is very much a people-centered one that goes beyond just technology, but really looks at a very wide range of types of innovations and applications. So I've just given two here, talking about community social innovation and the GIS work, but there's a range of efforts being put in place to try and understand how do we broaden our understanding of doing things better, which is ultimately what innovation is, whether that's technology, technology enhanced social engagements, or whatever the case is. So it's really as broader a perspective as possible.
Thanks, Davis. Any other input? Okay. No, thanks. I don't see any hand indicating any input. We've almost come to the end of this webinar, and I think I'll just make some few closing remarks and plot the next steps. Now, from the Minerals Council, I just wish to highlight a few points in terms of the presentations that have been made. That the presentations fall within our scope of work insofar as understanding the lay of the land in terms of technology options. So we have seen what is the art of the possible. Now we have a few cycles to square. The first one is that we are a mining, we represent mining companies. And therefore it does take a bit of effort to, to take the next steps in terms of from a product stewardship perspective, that from a mining perspective, that if you don't, safeguard the integrity and the sustainability of your product down the value chain, you are the one who's going to suffer. Because when Eskom closes power stations, it does result in the decline of the number of mining companies that are capable of providing coal to Eskom. So there is an existential threat from a coal mining perspective that if we don't adopt the product stewardship approach to coal, that we might be compromising the future of some of our company members. But our members are fully aware of the existential threat, and they are fully compliant in terms of the regulatory framework going forward. And they are fully aware that we need to be innovative in terms of crafting the future that we like. So for the purpose of coal, we advance the view that there's also a place for coal in the sun. And that we, from a coal mining perspective, we need to collaborate with other role players. For instance, we are discussing the just energy transition process with Eskom, so that because we share communities with Eskom, if power stations close, it's almost similar to a mining operation closing. So you need some kind of a post-mining, post-power station economy of some sort. And therefore we are collaborating with Eskom to be able to come to the, to the determination what a power station closure economy looks like, what a post-mining economy looks like. The other part of our work, besides the one that Davis has have put forward, is that as part of the broader business, we are looking at all the dependencies that are essential for the country to advance to a low carbon economy. So we are looking at the art of the possible, the dependencies, the pathways required to reach that low carbon economy, and the sort of mitigation measures that we need to put in place. So technology was just one of the options that are on the table, one of the opportunities that are on the table. But we also heard from the presentations that because of technology, we can also advance the continued use of coal in other areas other than energy production, but also the rare earth elements, those elements that are required for renewable energy to be sustainable, they are also the products of mining. And therefore mining needs to take place. And for mining to needs to take place in the short term, they need the benefit of having a coal-based energy program. So the presentations will be packaged and will be on our website, so you can have access to them as soon as the technical team have put things together. And on that note, I wish to thank the panelists for making time in terms of preparation for the webinar and the valuable information that they've shared with us. And I think their details are actually will also be available on our website. And I also wish to thank the minerals team, council's team, for putting up this initiative, and our technological advisors, Russell and Associates, for managing the process up to this point. On that note, thanks very much. The webinar has come to an end. Bye-bye.